Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. This is the latest episode in my experiment of ad-libbing on topics that I plan to cover in my book, Smarter, A Menson's Guide to Career, Relationships, etc. And so this one I want to talk a little bit about choosing a career for the really smart. Now, the really smart, I've been a member of Mensa for since 1973, and so I've gotten to know a good number of them, and many of them are indeed underachievers, and they've opted to use their intelligence to just get by. So they will do the least they can get away with and just use their smarts to get by, whether it be smarts in just finding a way to get cheap rent, or smarts in the way of being economizing, or smarts in the way of talking their way into a job that's easy and they can learn quickly, even though they don't have a lot of experience. And the older I get, the more I conclude that that's an option for folks. Many Mensons prefer to dabble, because they can get real expert real quickly in many different things, and so they'd rather just not let money get in the way of their freedom to do whatever the hell they want. So they just make whatever money they need to get by, and so they're viewed as big underachievers, but end up spending a lot of time on whatever that's not remunerative, whether it be their photography or doing puzzles or a very sybaritic lifestyle, which I found many Mensons perhaps surprisingly live. My very first introduction to Mensa was a take your clothes off hot tub party, which was not part of my fairly mainstream existence. But in any case, this one is about some thoughts about if you are a high IQ person, and I know people don't like the word high IQ or the word IQ these days, but truthfully, the studies are unambiguous in it being the best single predictor of ability to do high-level tasks in work and otherwise. So I just want to talk about a few high-level careers that I know something about. Of course, there are many others, but I don't want to go beyond what I know. So I want to start by talking about medical researcher, which I probably consider the highest moral good. That's not well said. The career that yields the most societal benefit, which I consider the most important factor. And the biggest mistake of my life was that because I found college science courses hard. They simply are harder, but I assumed that meant I wasn't smart enough. But I should have been a genetics researcher, a medical researcher who was studying the biological basis of intelligence or cancer or something like that. But if I had a son or a daughter who was really high IQ, that is somebody who scored, say, above the 1300 or 1400 on the SAT, or those are proxy. Nobody likes to use IQ tests anymore because there's all kinds of let's just call them political implications. But if my kid was a high ability person who was willing to bust ass, either probably needing the PhD in molecular biology or mathematics or biochemistry, biophysics, computer science, real data science, I would encourage them to be a genetics researcher. We're learning that ever more of who we are is genetic, but it is a really hard road because in almost every field, but perhaps surprisingly in medical, there is an oversupply of PhDs, even in that very difficult field. But I would probably encourage my son or daughter to pursue that PhD in as prestigious a place as possible, or drop out of school and learn on their own. There's a small percentage of people who say, screw it. I'm really, these truly high IQ people, they say, screw it, I'm just going to learn as much as I can on my own, talk my way into a entry-level assistant job in a really prestigious, high-quality lab that's doing research on genetics of something, and then study my butt off on my own, learning just in time, And there's a certain percentage of people who do that. They say, I don't want to sit through all those courses. It's just so long and very often so much is irrelevant. So the Mensa level person, the really high level person, and maybe even beyond, the really smart 140, 150 IQ person, the 1400 plus SAT or GRE person, could probably do a lot of studying on their own if they had the gift of gab to talk their way into a research lab and do a lot of learning on their own. I mean, that's what, in the computer area, that's what Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Steve Case from AOL, the really smart people, they're just too impatient to deal with school. And they'd rather do their learning on their own or with mentors or on the job. And again, just one little more word about it. Why do I consider that the most rewarding field, ultimately, in terms of societal contribution? That's because if it's unlikely you're going to cure cancer. But even if you've closed some blind alleys and made some steps forward, the potential, and I think about the amount of pain and suffering that people who have cancer and their families and friends suffer, if you can help deal with one kind of cancer more effectively than just poisoning it, the ripple effect is huge and in perpetuity, and then people will stand on the shoulders of you as they move forward. That's the answer for me in terms of meaning, in terms of life. I just love it. And I don't mean just physical health like cancer, but intelligence is the prerequisite to solving all kinds of problems. And even just having average intelligence is critical to making your way in the world. And there's half of people by definition have IQs under 100. And that makes it very difficult for them to make their way into a world that's ever more information centric. So if you can understand the biological basis of intelligence and come up with what I metaphorically call an intelligence pill, so that when you start out life, an intelligence pill that a prospective parent would take, or some kind of genetic selection of embryos or whatever, so that the child doesn't start out with a genetic strike or two against them, but has a shot at making it in the world. Unlike, when you're born, if you're not born with way below average intelligence, you're almost consigned to a life of failure. And so being somebody who's studying the genetic basis of intelligence, or depression, which of course is so debilitating for millions, or the genetic basis of, cancer and heart disease and diabetes and even less common diseases like Parkinson's. You think about the ALS. I can't think of a better career. But of course, not everybody's going to be interested in that. By the way, we're learning that even impulse control has a huge genetic component. So being a medical researcher trying to understand the genetic basis of impulse control would be inordinately valuable. Now, a lot of people who are science-oriented or high IQ tend to go to be MDs. And I think that's a very, very overrated career, because the training is very long and very expensive. And then you're just really kind of, while there is some cleverness in diagnosis or whatever, much of what most doctors do end up being is quite repetitious. Even if you're a general practitioner, internist, much of what you're doing is same old, and that can get old. And especially in an era where we're going to have single-payer health care, I'm almost positive, where your salaries are going to be very reduced, your workload's going to be ever higher. I'm just not convinced that, and the paperwork is so enormous now, it'd probably be less than single-payer. I'm convinced it's the most, maybe one of the most overrated careers. Speaking of overrated careers for really smart people, is lawyer. Certainly there was a certain person, my daughter's a lawyer and quite happy. She's a prosecutor of sex crimes for the Department of Justice. And I think she loves her job. And a certain percentage of lawyers love it. But so many lawyers end up hating their job. 75% of lawyers, according to one survey, hate their job, wouldn't want their kids to be lawyers. Because it's very contentious. People who tend to go into law tend to be contentious, and you're arguing over what ends up being fairly trivial, predominantly so that whether one corporation or government agency gets more money, another government agency gets less money. It's not like on TV where you're serving some huge large good. You're very often involved in a great deal of trivia and massive amounts of data, reviewing of case law and statutes. And parsing words and contracts. It's not a career I can feel great about encouraging people to do. notwithstanding the money and the prestige, I do think that prestige is maybe America's most overrated criterion in choosing a job. It's a very ethereal thing, and I am obsessed with the idea that what makes people happy in their career is doing work they think is important and is moderately challenging, not unduly challenging. The other thing I want to talk about that I think is potentially overrated is being an executive. You know, especially in our era of collaboration, decreased hierarchy, you're going to see a lot of executives very unhappy. They're working very long and hard hours to compete, but they end up being fairly impotent because they're controlled by a combination of their workers, shareholders, incredibly ever larger amounts of government regulation, which I believe will increase. I do believe that a Democrat, I know it's wild thinking, but it won't be Biden. I think he will be forced to drop out, if not because of the Me Too type allegations, but because his I consider senility, early stage senility, will become very clear when he can't be on a teleprompter during the debates. I'm crazy enough to think that Elizabeth Warren will unsuspend her campaign and she will be the President of the United States, and that both houses of Congress will be. And that's going to mean ever more regulations and taxes on corporations, which are going to make life of the executive really hard. High IQ people could be executives, but I'm not convinced that that's a smart way to go. The other thing, you know, lest I end this discussion of careers on a negative note, I do think, and it's no surprise here, that the future is going to be very data science centric. I'm not talking just about somebody who knows how to query databases, but somebody who really knows, understands statistics really, really well, and has a good intuition for how to create algorithms that are going to be better at querying databases and even more central, who are going to be clever enough to design approaches to machine learning, where computers are self-teaching. That can do enormous amounts for good, of course, and for evil. But let's just take outside, obviously, in the medical realm, do a much better job of diagnosis. But also in automating games, like, how can what are going to be these models that are going to be self-teaching that are going to prevent pandemics, or more readily, quickly address them, or develop vaccines, or artificial intelligence, machine learning based psychotherapist. I think any of those are going to be invaluable for improving humankind. So people who are really more data centric, I think becoming an expert at data science, whether you're going to go the college degree or the PhD in data science, or you're going to be more one of those really geniuses, those Mensa level, more super Mensa level people who can learn on their own. I do think that true data science careers, artificial intelligence, machine learning, although those are buzzwords, but I do think that some variant thereof is going to be the future, and much of that's going to be done at the very, very granular level, whether it be molecules that are going to be assayed and studied via data science, or simply trying to take single pieces of data and learn, teach computers how to be wiser in creating ever smarter algorithms for solving problems. Anyway, it's a little longer than I had hoped for, but I think those are some of my best thoughts about how high IQ people can make the most of their careers, or at least in terms of choosing. I'm going to probably do a subsequent one on how to make the most of your career, because it's one thing to choose a career, but there's another to how to make the most of it, both for your own self improvement financially and psychically, as well as making the biggest contribution. But for now, I want to thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nemko. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below and share on your social media, so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I'm flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.